Producer's note, this episode was recorded before the war began in the Middle East. We will talk about the implications for the retail industry of the conflict in next week's episode. Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, the only podcast hosted by two of NRF's top retail voices. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
We have one of our no-guest episodes for you today. Steve has been jonesing after our many great interviews at NRF to get back on the mic and talk about what we still get wrong about modern retail, including, nice teaser here, and some startling factoids about Walmart. After that segment, we'll be back with the remarkable story of the week and what is on our radar screen. Now, Steve, we've teased about our ShopTalk participation coming up in Vegas in a few short weeks. Share some more details with the people about what you and we are up to.
Yes, well, we both have some things going on. Speaking about myself, I will be on stage twice. Both times happen to be on the Tuesday. So coming up, 3 weeks from the release of this episode. Imagine there's still time to get your ticket. I'm sure the ShopTalk folks will appreciate our mentioning that. But what are these two things? Well, the first one is a track keynote with Brett Taylor. Now, this is a guy who knows a little something about AI. The ShopTalk conference is themed around pretty much all things AI. He's had some pretty good jobs. He's the former co-CEO of a little company called Salesforce. He's the current board chair at a little company called OpenAI, former board chair in the pre-Elon days at Twitter. And now he is the co-founder and CEO of a startup called Sierra, which is innovating on customer service using agentic AI. So I think that's going to be a great conversation. And then the thing that you're involved with, but I'll let you talk about what you're doing, is something that we helped the ShopTalk folks put together called the Retail Rumble.
And I'm going to ask the one and only Michael Buffer to introduce the next segment and tell us all about Retail Rumble. Here we go.
For the thousands in attendance from Mandalay Bay, Las Vegas.
That's right. We're going to be rumbling. Tell us and the people all about what this Retail Rumble is all about.
Well, this is a 10th anniversary special here. We helped the ShopTalk folks put this together, the Retail Rumble, or I like to call it Retail Fight Club, but there might be some intellectual property issues there. Not that there wasn't with that thing we just played, but have your lawyers call our lawyers. But anyway, this is going to be, I think, a really fun and insightful segment or part of the show. There will be 4 fights or debates on topics of keen interest. Just to give you a flavor for those. One is, will e-commerce enter a new era of accelerated growth? The second, does retail media improve or detract from the customer journey? The third, which I will be participating in, is, can department stores be resurrected? I'll let our listeners guess which side I might be on in that one. And the last one, probably the most provocative one, is, will AI take your job? Now, the fighters include quite a few past podcast guests: Neil Saunders, Sarah Engel, Kiri Masters, and Ken Pilot, who I will be mopping the floor with in our debate about department stores. But you've also got a role.
100 and whatever pounds the wet that Ken Pilot is. Versus,
I'm going to say he's in a different weight class than I am, which is definitely lower. If any of you have seen the two of us in person, but anyway, you will get that opportunity. Judge yourself. Anyway. Speaking of judging, how was that for a great segue? You have a role in this party. What is your role, Mr. LeBlanc?
Well, I will be trying to hold all this together with the one and only, the vivacious Ann Mazinga, 50% of OmniTalk podcast and 100% retail guru. Ann and I will be moderating this, making sure everybody stays on task. And just like a good MMA referee, I will be tackling people if they go, and Ann will as well. She'll be suplexing them to make sure everybody stays on time. So it's going to be fast-paced, 8 minutes each. This isn't like a Chatham House Rules thing. This is fast-paced. We're going to go. So entertainment, dial the entertainment knob to 11, and the insights are going to follow. So that is what we're planning for ShopTalk.
Yeah, it should be fun. That's at the end of the day on Tuesday. Drinks will be available, so that may or may not make the rumbling more rumblicious.
More entertaining.
And then just to wrap this up, we will also, of course, be recording a few episodes for the podcast. But I think that's really going to pale in comparison to the Retail Rumble.
All right. Well, without further ado, and there's been much ado, let's get to news of the week. Well, we had our big decision come down from the Supreme Court. We've had a State of the Union. It feels like there is this Gordian-styled knot about now we turn our minds to what happens next. And I turn my minds to things like refunds. And, you know, retailers are pretty good at issuing refunds, but they don't love returns. But what's the story here with these tariffs?
Well, there's been, I guess, a lot of speculation and analysis since the Supreme Court ruling. One guy that I follow on Substack is the economist Paul Krugman. He wrote an interesting piece, which I would advise people to check out on Substack after they check out my Substack, of course, which he titled Attack of the Zombie Tariffs. But a lot of speculation about how we might be stuck here in litigation. Mr. Trump obviously isn't particularly thrilled about the ruling, doesn't really want to give the money back, basically suggests that the economy will fall apart. If that happens, that might be a little bit of hyperbole. There's plenty of jazz handing going on in the State of the Union address. I mentioned to you off mic that I heard one of my favorite economists, Justin Wolfers, talk about his analysis of the new economic policy suggested by the president in the State of the Union, and he referred to it as mostly lying, which I tend to agree with.
I would say Adderall will do that to you every now and then.
That is at least one contributing factor. We can decide what the rest are. Anyway, I think what's really most noticeable is gearing up for quite a lot of fighting. Speaking of rumbling and fighting, the battle for refunds is going on. The Wall Street Journal reports over 1,800 companies have already filed lawsuits saying, give us our money back. So I suspect that will not be resolved super quickly, but we shall see. So more turmoil, more uncertainty. I would say go get your popcorn and settle in, because this is likely to be quite interesting and annoying all at the same time.
Let's turn our minds now to earnings. What did we learn from the earnings of the week?
Well, they're coming in fast and furious. We'll get some more next week to talk about. Just a few to point out. TJ Maxx, or TJX, the parent company of several off-price retailers, does well again. But what I thought was, so as far as just, I guess, saying what they did well, 9% overall increase, because they're continuing to open quite a lot of stores, 5% comp. They did say they will be opening about 146 new stores this year. That will get them to something like 5,300 stores. I'm always, every time I hear about how many off-price stores there are, it's just kind of mind-boggling. But the most interesting thing was they struck a pretty cautious tone. They are forecasting their comps will decline into the range of 2 to 3%. So they are definitely seeing, as some other companies have weighed in, we'll talk about a couple others in a second, that the consumer seems to be growing ever more cautious. Now, some people did point out that both Walmart, which we talked about last week, and we'll talk about a little bit later in the episode, have fairly consistently erred on the low side early in the year, and then they end up beating it. So perhaps we should take that forecast with a grain of salt. But they don't typically, I think they haven't forecasted such a low number in a number of years. The another set of big retailers striking a cautious tone were both Home Depot and Lowe's in the home improvement sector. I kind of, my little sub-headline for this was, is flat the new up? Because they have really struggled to move the top line, and this recent quarter was no different. Home Depot's comps were 0.4% positive. Lowe's did a little bit better at 1.3%, but obviously those are not groundbreaking numbers. And importantly, both companies saw their profits go in the other direction. So some of that is not really keeping up with inflation and not being able to leverage their fixed costs. Some of that is tariff related. So one of the things that I've been pointing out, and I used to talk about actually years and years ago when I had a real job running a division, where we talked about this profit wedge, which is, given the fixed costs that most retailers have, if you can grow your sales 4, 5, 6%, that typically translates more to like 9, 10, 11% profits. And that, of course, is what we like to get our bonuses, but also Wall Street likes that. And it looks like it's getting harder and harder at some retailers because inflation obviously raising their costs. But if they can't get the top line moving, then that is likely to either translate to decreases or much more aggressive moves in taking costs out of the business, whether that's headcount reduction, store closings, et cetera.
Yeah. I'd say one thing about the comps for both those businesses is they do comp off these one-time, very, very bad weather events. And of course, they don't enjoy the fact, but they do benefit from a very active hurricane or flood or, tremendous snow. So I think in some of the commentary, if you look at last year, they're trying to comp off a particularly strong periods that are based on these one-time events. So that is a bit of a factor with these home improvement guys. But I don't think it changes the net conclusion, but one thing to always keep in mind. Now, speaking of keeping in mind, my wife just signed up for a new pair from a former, I guess we can call them that, a former wobbly unicorn. Let's talk about Warby Parker.
Yeah, well, we've talked about Warby Parker quite a lot. One of their founders, Neil Blumenthal, has been on the pod. Yeah, if you go back to the beginning of the podcast, we talked about a lot of these so-called digitally native vertical brands that were trying to find their footing. And many of them, as we've talked about multiple times, have continued to be quite wobbly. Well, Warby Parker really for, probably 18 months or so has really been putting up good numbers. They've gotten much more focused on profits over growth, though they're still growing quite nicely. They opened 47 new stores last year. They're looking to open about 50 this year. So that will get them to 370, something like that. They claim they can get to maybe 800 stores in North America. We shall see. I'm a little skeptical that they can make that number. But nevertheless, 11% sales growth, which is a slowing of sales growth, but really pretty solid customer metrics. So I think it's a little bit hard to tell whether the slowness in their business is really the broader macroeconomic issues because they are more fashion forward, that's more discretionary, or whether there's maybe the total addressable market of the business isn't quite as big as they think. But for sure, they continue to do much better. Technically, they had their first quarter on a GAAP accounting basis of being profitable, though they got across the finish line because they had a lot of interest income because they have a lot of cash on the balance sheet. So, but anyway, everything's moving in a really good direction, and I think it is fundamentally a really solid business, which is nice to see because too often we're talking about the Allbirds or others that are not in quite such a good set of circumstances.
We had a code name for the owner of Hudson's Bay here in Canada in the retail industry. We called him, that fucking guy, who tends to actually has popped his head up back again. Talk about it.
Well, some people need to lick their wounds and just go home or spend more time with their family. And I think Richard Baker is probably one of them. I did feature, this will be my second plug for my Substack, but on last week's Substack, I did have a little section, which I called This Week in Chutzpah. So if you don't know your Yiddish, go look that up. But let's just say you have a lot of nerve to be saying this. He did an interview with the New York Times. He said a bunch of things. I love this quote. I had 50,000 people working for 10 years longer than they would have. That's more than 500,000 work years. I kept each one of these businesses going longer than anyone on earth ever could have. Okay. Sure. Anyway, that is one way to really
very on brand. It's
very on brand, and anyway, the only other thing I will say, which I also mentioned in my Substack, is reports that he is struggling to find a publisher for a memoir on his retail exploits. May be exaggerated, but apparently no one is interested in a book that has only one chapter, chapter 11. I'm here all week. Tip your waitresses. Try the veal.
Hope you enjoy the chicken. Hope you enjoy the chicken. All right. That's a wrap on the news. Now let's get to you and me talking about what we still get wrong about modern retail. Now, in addition to being better clickbait for, of a title, I do find it a useful question for guests and a useful container for some interesting thinking about a wide range of topic. So talk about how you arrived at this particular frame or topic for our episodes.
Well, two things. One is I've got the 5th anniversary of the second edition of my first book. So 5-2-1, it's a little confusing.
Okay.
My book, Remarkable Retail, coming up. And it just turned out kind of coincidentally, I had several conversations with people over the last, several weeks about, if I had to do it all, well, that's actually in the context of, am I working on another book? I am not.
Right.
What would you do differently? Would you do anything differently if you were to write that book again? And so I've given some thought to that. And for the most part, my answer is no, not really. I mean, there's always stuff I would do differently, but it just got me thinking about, well, how relevant is my 8 essentials framework and how much of just the setup part doesn't really resonate today? But the specific thing, and I teased this last week, that there was a number in the Walmart earnings report that surprised me a bit, that I also didn't feel like people were paying attention to, or I don't know, maybe I just paid attention to it. Nobody else cares. I guess we'll see whether any of this resonates with anybody. But anyway, that just got me thinking like, well, there's a lot of conversation about how retail operates today, but I still see that a lot of people either get quite a bit wrong or just don't appreciate some things that I think are important if you're going to be successful today and into the future. So anyway, that's kind of the aspect of it.
All right. So don't keep us in suspense. What is it that you noticed in the Walmart numbers that have avoided or evaded scrutiny from others in our sector?
Well, maybe other people already know this, though I don't think so. If you look at the earnings announcement and presentation and the conversation, one of the things that they're very clear about, as we talked about, was that I think there was a 24% increase in e-commerce business at Walmart worldwide, and their overall sales were up 5%. Well, that made me wonder, what does that say about sales through their brick and mortar stores? And I tumbled a little bit of math, which I can't get exactly right because of the way they report some things, but it seems pretty clear that that meant that sales through brick and mortar stores were down for the quarter. And I guess another thing, just as an aside, I missed that Walmart reports comp store sales differently than a lot of other retailers do. I think most retailers, but maybe this has changed as well, something I need to dig into, take their physical stores, any store that's been open a year or more, they then calculate how much that set of stores has had their sales increase or decrease. Well, Walmart doesn't do that. They do part of that, but they include e-commerce in their same store sales report. So that is why I hadn't noticed before that in the traditional definition of same store sales, their same store sales are actually down, and I think have been down for several quarters. So anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting, and I haven't seen anybody comment on it. And like I say, maybe people are like, oh, whatever, we don't care. I think it's at least worth talking about whether that suggests anything, whether it's surprising or alarming or what have you.
Well, that bridges to my next question is should we care? Is this, we talk often about the change of channel and following the customer and how they're shopping. Do you find this surprising, alarming? I mean, just your description of it caught me off guard. I remember when I was at Hudson's Bay, one year we came out with a profit number and it was 110% of the profit was generated in the credit card business. We're like, uh-oh,
yes,
that can't be good, 110%. Yeah. So what you just said reminded me of that. But, we know, is this just the way the river is flowing and we shouldn't be too surprised to hear it?
I guess at one level, just mathematically, and this is why I'm kicking myself a little bit that I didn't realize it earlier. I mean, their e-commerce business has been growing, as we've talked about, at a really, really fast rate for quite a while now. And it's become a very big percentage of sales. So to a certain degree, it's just what the math says. And we know, also we've talked about this a bunch, that Walmart has been doing a lot to drive their digital business. But I think more importantly, which is probably what we should talk about more, is that there is this hybridization of retail where digital and physical are more merged. So not only is that Walmart fulfilling store orders or fulfilling e-commerce orders from store stock, but buy online, pick up in store. So a lot of these things we have talked about over the years are just really amplified and have been a big focus for them. Is it alarming? I mean, I think this gets a little bit to a broader point I want to make, which is the way retailers think about performance. And to the extent you have a channel-centric view and you talk about and you measure four-wall profit contribution, if you are transferring sales, one way of thinking about it, to another channel, then the profitability, if you look at it the wrong way, then the profitability of your brick and mortar stores is deteriorating. And that would cause you perhaps to either not invest in as much in stores, not to open new stores, potentially to even consider closing stores. I don't think that's a big issue at Walmart, but I know it's a big issue. I've just in the last few months been in some conversations with retailers that told me a lot about four-wall profitability. And when I asked them about their e-commerce business and the interrelationship, they were like, humana. Like they didn't know. So I don't think it necessarily speaks to any kind of issues in Walmart's business. The business overall has performed exceptionally well. I asked our friends at Placer.ai what they know about store traffic, and store traffic at Walmart total, including Sam's Club, was up in the last quarter 2.4%. So traffic up, sales rung up in the store down. How much of that traffic is people going in to check out things that they buy online later? How much of that is returns? How much of that is buy online, pick up in store? We don't have that level of granularity. I assume Walmart does. I've never seen them talk about it. If we step away from Walmart and we talk about everybody not at Walmart, how well do you understand the dynamics of your business? Are you thinking about profitability and metrics in your advertising spend and a whole host of other things, in the right way that really reflects the way the world is today? So, this whole what we get wrong about retail, I think one of the things is not necessarily thinking about the dynamics properly and not having the tools and measurements to understand really what's going on and what's driving the business.
Reflecting on what you're saying, I want to think about how that impacts your thinking or how we should be thinking about modern retail. Now, I use modern retail probably too easily. Like I say, in modern retail, it's a phrase that makes me look like I'm smart or something, I guess. When you say modern retail, what do you mean?
Well, it's funny because I had an experience pretty recently when I said, well, I don't think we're really thinking with one of my clients, I don't think we're really thinking about this like a modern retailer. And they were like, what do you mean? And so I was like, okay, I guess I should explain it. And I don't know that I've got a tight definition, but the reason I said it was I felt like we were in this particular conversation really using old ways to think about managing the business, but also not really acknowledging how much has changed. So when you think about some of the things that have changed, that to me reflect what I mean by modern retail. I mean, modern retail, first of all, is getting away from a channel-centric view. Like if you think about the old way of thinking about retail, very channeled, very siloed. And I think the best retailers, the modern retailers, don't think about channels so much. There used to be a ton of friction and boundaries were more, the channel boundaries, but also just in general, how consumers get information, how they transact. It's much more boundaryless, much less friction, power shifting away from the brands and the real estate more to the consumer, the speed at which things happen. I think from a leadership standpoint or a management standpoint, I often find myself saying, what got you here isn't likely to get you where you need to go. That a lot of the things that made retailers successful, definitely 20 years ago, but I would say even 4, 5, 6 years ago, are not likely to be super helpful as they move ahead. So it's really more a mindset of, are we really reflecting the state of retail today and where it's going? Have we really shifted the way we manage the business, think about the business? Well,
it's a great frame around which to put this conversation as well, in addition to the kind of what we get wrong. But as you think about these things, what has really evolved since? You make several great points about what modern retail thinking is, but how's that evolved in the past almost 5 years since you wrote Remarkable Retail?
Well, some of these things I would say have been in motion for a while, but when you think about kind of growth in all things digital, has been tremendous. So some of that is very obviously just online shopping, period. E-commerce, at least in the United States, is like twice as big as it was 5 or 6 years ago. So that's a massive change, even though the growth has slowed down a little bit. The other one, which I think still I'm surprised a lot of retailers don't know, is how much of their, really digital influence sort of writ large, but in particular, how much of their physical store sales is influenced by some sort of digital media or digital channel. And we know from work that Forrester has done and Deloitte's done over the years that on average, it's something like 70% of all physical store sales are somehow or other, start at a digital channel or influenced by a digital channel. So that's a pretty big shift.
Big number.
I talked a little bit about the hybridization of business models. Some of this is the blurring of the lines between physical and digital, and like I just said, digital influencing physical, but physical influencing digital as well. There's been a really, I think, pretty significant shift in distribution models, I guess, where we have less multi-line retail, wholesale in general becoming less important, but certain of the digitally native vertical brands, which originally thought they were going to be online only, not only turned out to really need stores, but also many of them are now selling through wholesale channels, direct from factory models, marketplace. But, also the supply chain, it used to, you would know from your background as well, anybody who's been in this industry for a long time, from a fulfillment standpoint, it used to be a store fulfillment and you had, mail order, direct to consumer fulfillment. Well, now that's much more hybrid.
Yeah, it's, when I think about what anybody can predict, I don't think anybody predicted exactly what we saw with Shein and Temu. You talk about the different way that brands go to market, but just the kind of the China factory direct or landfill direct, as I call it, and then this rise of the rise of even faster change with TikTok shops. I mean, what I thought about your book that was very insightful, amongst many things, was you didn't necessarily predict TikTok shops, but you said, listen, these things are changing faster than you think they are, which I thought was one of those big lessons that retailers should take away is you may not have the time. What did you phrase? You may not have the time you think you have.
Yeah, well, in the book, I quote from a book by Cervantes, which is, the problem is you think you have time. And that's a very common problem in general, but I think as the pace of change accelerates, it's much harder to anticipate. So you have to be more agile. I think the other thing that's a really big change is the erosion of boundaries. Again, it gets a little bit back to distribution channels where, you had physical stores, then you had mail order catalog. And then even in the earlier days of e-commerce was in many cases kind of just a better mail order catalog. But over time, as we got smart devices, one of the things I do say in Remarkable Retail is we've gone from a place where the best location used to be, having a beautiful store on the high street or in a mall or what have you. Oftentimes the best location for a brand is on the customer's phone, right? Because so many people are tethered to their mobile devices. And I often talk about that as like tethered and untethered, right? You're untethered from where you happen to be, but at the same time, you're tethered to this device so often. And so that means that the moment somebody gets a little inspiration about shopping, well, you just go check something out, get some research, be looking at a TikTok video. Maybe you're not even intending to buy anything, but all of a sudden you get inspired by something new you learned, and maybe you're buying it, or maybe you're registering. I got to go check that out, and that influences your purchase. But also, so you're gonna get the whole social media world. You have marketplaces. That's a really fundamental change as well, where suddenly this vast assortment is available to you 24/7 from, in many cases, just about anywhere in the world. And so, the middleman role is different, but also middlemen is in many cases becoming less important because you have direct from factory, you have direct from vendors in a way you didn't have. So all these things, again, many of these forces have been building for a long time. But the reason I bring it up is I think what many still get wrong about retail is they haven't really they're not as aware maybe of how these changes are changing the competitive dynamics and changing consumer dynamics. And then therefore they haven't fully reflected what they need to be doing. And this often is the thing that keeps them in kind of constant struggle or causes them to get further and further behind as things accelerate and change much more quickly.
We'll be right back with what we still get wrong about modern retail right after these messages. Promotional support for the Remarkable Retail podcast is provided by Crave Retail. What's retail's biggest blind spot? The fitting room. A shopper wants to buy, but can't get the help they need. That's why global brands partner with Crave Retail, the market leader in smart fitting rooms. Crave connects that moment to your business, giving shoppers a voice, associates real-time alerts, and teams the data to buy smarter. The result? Higher conversion, better decisions, a seamless experience. Learn how fast you can elevate your fitting rooms at craveretail.com. Today's episode is presented by Find Mine. Outfits, vibe, and trends are what your consumers eat up on social media. Are you capitalizing on them? Or do your experiences feel static or take too many hours to build and maintain? Listen to this. Find Mine delivers on-brand inspiration to over 100 million consumers every month. Lululemon and Ann Taylor use Find Mine's content engine to turn their catalogs into complete looks, better visual similar swaps, and on-trend programmatic ads, improving LTV, CAC faster than any other activation. Now, you can get live fast in as little as 1 week without enterprise contracts or waiting on a product backlog. Check them out at findmine.com. I wonder if it's happening again. And in this context, I wonder if AI is that. Like, I hear a lot about discovery, retailers turning their minds to how consumers are finding things, and they're thinking of it in the frame of SEO. Hey, we have to optimize AEO or whatever. And I'm wondering if that's an example of I'm putting a old framework on a very radical new technology in a very radical new way that consumers are discovering my product or my brand. Does it resonate with you at all?
It does, but I would even say before that, I still see a lot of lack of clarity around how customer journeys have evolved. And we've talked about it before in terms of customer journey mapping. And a lot of companies aren't doing it, or they aren't doing it at the level of detail they need. Because, of course, there's a very big difference. You know, I'll give you an example. I recently bought a new bathroom scale. You know, it's a very exciting product, right? But, you know, you could think about, well, if I already knew what I wanted to buy, you know, the particular brand or particular features or whatever, right? Then it's just a short path to getting it done, right? And maybe if I'm already locked into Amazon or Walmart Connect or whatever, you know, that's a very simple thing. But, you know, if I'm trying to figure out, as it turned out in this case, I sort of generally knew what I wanted. And I knew about this particular brand that I thought got good reviews. But anyway, I went through this journey of trying to figure out. Then I discovered the thing I thought I wanted. But boy, that seems really expensive. Is it worth it? So anyway, you go through this whole path. And, you know, so it's very different if you're on a mission just to secure, you know, something versus you're in discovery mode. Agentic AI or AI in general has a big opportunity to change that, because I can go into an agent and just say, I want to, you know, give me a bathroom scale that's got the best balances, price and features and whatever, right? And then that's going to pop up a much more tailored thing. So I do think, you know, search and discovery maybe get a bit more blended, but also who wins in that battle may be quite different because, and I know we've talked about it a little bit on the pod, your authority to show up in those, you know, there's obviously sponsorship and ChatGPT and others are starting to have ads. So it's going to depend on whether you're an ad-driven model or whether you've got a different model. But that's moving very, very, very quickly. And so, you know, one of the things about, you know, as I thought about this discussion was, you know, modern retail, the definition of modern retail today is not this definition that's going to be super, super helpful. Right. I mean, not everything's going to change, right? But the definition of modern retail in a couple of years' time is something. And the getting back to the problem you think you have time kind of idea, I still fundamentally think, and I've said this in keynotes and interviews in the past, you know, the world is very likely to change more in the next 5 years than it did in the past 15 or 20. And that's a really hard thing to get your mind around, not only because so much has changed in the last 15 or 20 years, right? Like, you know, cloud computing, smart devices, you know, initial AI, e-commerce growth, you know, blah, 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 you know. So it's hard to get your head around, but I believe it's absolutely the case. So if you're not wired to accept that and you're not really doing the work to stay ahead or at least on top, of what's going on, then you likely put yourself in a difficult situation. I think that's really more the leadership lesson is to free your, not only be really aware of the competitive changes, the customer changes, the technology changes, but from a leadership standpoint and an operating model standpoint, are you committed to learning? Are you setting up your incentives the right way? Are you making the changes in your structure, perhaps, that you need to? Are you experimenting enough? I mean, there's a lot there that I see companies not always doing. There are many that are doing it. And I think you can point, we talked about Walmart at the beginning. Walmart's an example of a company that I would say 5 or 6 years ago was not doing very well on this front, maybe 7 years ago. I'm not sure the exact timing, but greatly accelerated their progress and their commitment to it 4 or 5 years ago. And now you can really see how their results are paying off.
Yeah, there's no question under Doug McMillan's leadership, they had the epiphany that, we could lose this race and we need to change what we're doing. And I think, so let's turn the frown upside down, so to speak. If you've mentioned a couple of things that retailers listening can actually do, like customer journey mapping, and just be rigorous about that, be disciplined about understanding what and how the market is changing. Could you unpack that just for a minute or two? Like the top 3 things that any leadership retail executive should be doing today to not get caught flat-footed, to at least kind of see what's happening and then go to that second part that you said, change incentives or change structures. But what's your top 3 ideas that they could do?
One for sure is just be much more focused on the customer rather than the channel. I'm still amazed that is a thing that many retailers struggle with. But, I often say the customer is the channel, but I don't even like the idea of channels. You have to be mindful of distribution channels and media channels and all those kinds of things. But fundamentally, your brand is one brand to the customer, and the customer is going to behave pretty much the way they're going to behave, and you cannot control that. What you can control is how you design the customer experience to meet those needs, and that is to be much more channel agnostic in general. So breaking down those silos, changing the way you measure it, I would say that's one for sure. The second is to, I would say, embrace agility as a core competency, and that's a lot of different things, but I think these big projects, kind of monolithic view of how things are likely to evolve, that's just very difficult. In some cases you have to do it, but it's very difficult as a fundamental
hard to get right.
Operating principle. Yeah. And so I think thinking of agility as kind of a superpower or a core competency, I think is really, really fundamental. The third one, since I've only promoted my Substack twice, I have to, hit the the hat trick here.
You're under index.
One of the things I did in last week's Substack, I introduced this concept of rules for retail radicals, which is going to be kind of an ongoing segment. But the one I had there, which I do have in my book, is this idea of always be testing, or ABT. So it's a little bit riff because we like deep cuts too, a little Glengarry Glen Ross reference there. And I did use AI to do a nice visual with Alec Baldwin on that. So anyway, but it's this culture of experimentation and just being constantly trying new things, because it's just too hard to figure out what's going to work. So when you just go back to what we talked about just a few minutes ago about what is the characteristic of a modern retailer embraces the nature of, just that it's an uncertain environment. It's difficult to predict what's going to work, but part of the way you manage that risk is to always be testing and having the discipline to try stuff, quit things when they're not working, double down, triple down, 10x the things that are working. So I'd say, there's a bunch of other things too, but if I had to pick 3, those were the ones I think I'd go with.
Well, I'd add a fourth, which is do not miss a single episode of the Remarkable Retail Podcast, because we talk about this with not just amongst ourselves. Maybe you're the first time listening to our podcast, but we have some of the sharpest knives in the drawer, some of the best retailers in the world on the podcast who are themselves thinking about these exact same issues. So a little shameless self-promotion. Great discussion. Let's now get to our closing segments. What is the remarkable story of the week? Let's give them something to talk about. You go first.
Well, I have two quick ones, hopefully quick. One is really retail adjacent, which is NVIDIA's earnings, which came out last week. And a lot of people have been nervous about the so-called AI trade. NVIDIA didn't, in some respects, I guess, made people nervous, but not because of their results. They had amazing results. The thing that I found quite remarkable was that their fiscal year profits, two parts to this. One is they were $120 billion. That is up from $4.5 billion in just 3 years. So that's pretty remarkable. But putting it in the retail context, their profits are roughly equal to the entire revenues of either CVS or Walgreens, which are two of the top 10 biggest retailers in the world and materially larger than Target. So if you just try to get your head around like how much that is one way of envisioning it. But it really is striking how fast their business is growing and how incredibly profitable it is. Will the music keep on playing? I'm not about to predict, but at this point, it looks pretty good. The other one, which is much more, I guess it's retail adjacent as well, but it's because it's a broader point, but it has some big implications potentially for retail, is that for the first time, I think in a long, long time, the U.S. has had a decrease in net migration. In other words, more people left than came into the country. Now, some of that is because almost nobody is coming into the country because of the Trump administration's border policies, but also 675,000 people were deported by the Department of Homeland Security, 2.2 million, quote unquote, self-deported. And apparently this number is believed to be very much on the low side because they don't have complete data yet. At least 180,000 Americans left, said we are out of here. And that is believed to be a record number. Why do we care about this from a retail perspective? Because we can get into the politics. That's a different podcast.
Sure.
Well, typically about 1% of the increase in retail sales every year comes from population growth. Now, obviously, babies don't tend to spend a lot on retail, but they drive some retail sales. So there's that part of population growth.
Their parents sure do.
Right. Yeah. But also people new to the country spend. So this is both potentially a drag. Well, I mean, it is a drag. How much of a drag it is on retail sales remain to be seen. But there are also some obvious implications on employment dynamics in terms of people working in retail, working in manufacturing, and the like. So that'll be interesting to see. Certainly the Trump administration is hell-bent, it seems, on increasing the number of people deported, and they don't seem to be particularly interested in increasing the number of people coming to this country, and they seem to be chasing away some people, Americans, citizens, out of the country. Whether the number for this year ends up being even more people net out of the country, we will see.
All right, for me, in terms of remarkable story of the week, a Wall Street Journal article caught my attention about, wait for it, cash. I remember several years ago, I made some public pronouncements that cash was not going away, and I got some communications from a bunch of retailers who said, you shouldn't be saying that because it's absolutely going away. I'm like, are you sure? Next to debit, in this country anyway, and I think in the U.S. as well, it's one of the cheapest ways to collect money for retailers. Sure, there's a bit of there's a bit of theft risk. You got to have, it's not like the old days when the store manager would walk to the bank in the mall to do the day's deposit. You got to roll a Brinks truck, but still, it's pretty good. And surprise, surprise, according to this article, which pointed me to the Federal Reserve report from late 25, but it reports on 24. They're all a bit delayed. When asked, which of the following ways have you paid for something? 78% of people said cash. Now, that's a little bit lower for Gen Z, as we probably would expect, but it's 67% for Gen Z. And the silent generation, by the way, when did we stop calling them the greatest generation? Why are they now the silent generation?
There's some other generations I wish would be a little bit more quiet, but that's a different story.
81%. That's no surprise. But, and then I looked at some Canadian numbers, which I imagine are somewhat kind of close. I thought it was remarkably high. And in Canada, when I have the actual usage numbers from Payments Canada, cash is used actively by 48% of the population. And when asked, 20% said it was because it was anonymous. And it is used in 11% of all transactions. Now, of course, that's down 14% year over year, so it's not trending upwards.
Yeah.
But, every time I see a sign that says we don't take cash,
Yeah.
I know the trade-offs that are being made for in the retail context and food service, but I also think there's a trade-off there because there are a lot of people. I mean, millions of people are unbanked, and it's better for retailers in some ways because you don't have the high cost associated. And of course, the credit card companies are very much don't ever use cash again because it's in their vested interest. So anyway, it just got me thinking about the use of cash.
The money. Literally.
Yeah. You know, for a while, I think some legislators were worried about Amazon Go not taking cash and they were going to pass some legislation and stuff. I think the consumers are going to take care of this. I think cash ain't going away anytime soon. What's on your radar screen that you're keeping an eye on?
It's really Saks Global's progress through the bankruptcy court. Obviously, we've talked about this multiple times. This past week, there was what I thought was both pretty good news for their progress, as well as, I think, a leadership lesson. So Geoffroy van Rommedoc, the newish CEO, though he was previously the CEO at Neiman Marcus before they got acquired, he posted on LinkedIn and did an extensive interview about what's going on, particularly with improving their liquidity and getting more product into the store. So the specific thing was that more than 380 brands, which is a staggeringly large number, obviously some of those are quite small, have resumed shipping to Saks and Neiman Marcus. That is releasing about $1.2 billion in retail receipts, which is pretty significant. I think the total sales pre-bankruptcy would be about $8 billion. And apparently there continues to be some pretty healthy momentum on receipts. So he said that their receipts year over year are up by 30%. Now that compares to really a dearth of receipts last year. So that in and of itself is not necessarily an amazing number on an absolute basis, but it is a ton of progress. This is coming at just about the perfect time, really, because it's the start of the spring fashion season. Now, there's no guarantee that this momentum will continue, and there's lots of issues still to be worked out, including additional store closings and all that kind of stuff. So no reason to really declare victory here, but this is a very important step in terms of getting the business on better footing, getting more both vendor trust and consumer trust, I think is really critical.
For me, I noted that the U.S. mortgage rates have dropped below 6%. That seems to be a bit of a magic number. First time since 2022, with the benchmark 30-year rate averaging, 5.8, 5.9. And just thinking back to our commentary about Lowe's and Home Depot, I mean, that may mark a significant shift for home buyers. And there is no bigger stimulus than people moving and buying a house for home improvement, furniture, house, or nothing. People, it's been described as people being rate locked. So is the drop below 6% the key that opens rate lock, which could be another tremendous factor to drive stimulus, not just in the home improvement category, but in many, many other categories. So I'll be keeping an eye on that because we should see some results on that actually pretty quickly. So will it get people moving again? That's a wrap on this episode. Let's leave it there.
Thanks for tuning in. To help more retail leaders discover the industry's leading podcast, please drop us that 5-star rating and review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy your pods. And for more on my strategic advisory services, keynote speaking, best-selling books, and even more retail industry insights, go to StephenPDennis.com.
If you are a brand or service provider looking to take your influence to the next level, reach out to us for sponsorship, advertising, or event partnerships. And if you want to learn more about my own keynote speaking and advisory practice, reach out to me via LinkedIn.